settle in and listen carefully. What I am about to tell you is a tale of failure, not merely the failure of one boy, but the systematic, generational failure that shaped him, molded him, and very nearly destroyed him. The story of Draco Lucius Malfoy is not one of simple villainy, though many would prefer to paint it as such. No, it is far more complex, far more tragic than the simplistic narratives spun by those who lack the intellectual capacity to see beyond surface impressions. I speak, of course, from a position of intimate knowledge. I watched this boy grow from an arrogant first year into something far more pitiable. Young man crushed beneath the weight of expectations he never asked for, loyalty he never chose, and a darkness he never truly desired. But to understand Draco Malfoy, we must first understand where he came from. We must examine the poisoned roots of the family tree that bore such bitter fruit. The Malfoys. Ah, yes. One of the so-called Sacred 28, those pure-blood families deemed worthy of recognition in the pure-blood directory of the 1930s. Though I must note, with no small amount of irony, that the compiler of that particular piece of propaganda was himself a Malfoy sympathizer. Convenient, wouldn't you say? The family's history stretches back centuries, though not quite as far back as they would have you believe. The original Malfoys arrived in Britain with William the Conqueror, so the family legend claims. In truth, they were Norman nobility who saw opportunity in the conquest and seized it with both hands. Armand Malfoy, the first to set foot on English soil, insinuated himself into the new regime with remarkable speed. He acquired land through means that were, shall we say, questionable Muggle land, initially, which he promptly expanded through magical means, hidden from non-magical eyes. This established the pattern that would define the Malfoys for generations. Acquisition of power and wealth through manipulation, political maneuvering, and a flexible relationship with morality. They were never warriors, you understand. Never the ones to lead charges or die gloriously in battle. No. The Malfoys were always the ones whispering in the ears of those who held the sword, ensuring that when the dust settled, Malfoy interests were served. Through the medieval period, the family embedded themselves ever deeper into both wizarding and Muggle aristocracy. They played all sides of the various conflicts that raged across Britain, supporting monarchs when convenient, backing rebellions when profitable, and always emerging with their wealth intact or increased. During the Muggle witch hunts, while other wizarding families went into hiding or suffered losses, the Malfoys somehow managed to protect their interests, even profiting from the confiscation of property belonging to less fortunate magical families. The construction of Malfoy Manor in Wiltshire occurred sometime in the late medieval period. The estate itself sits upon land that once belonged to a family of unknown namer, family that mysteriously disappeared from all records shortly after the Malfoys took possession. The manor, with its elaborate peacocks, its drawing rooms filled with dark artifacts, and its dungeons that have seen unspeakable acts, became the physical manifestation of Malfoy ambition and cruelty. Through the centuries, the Malfoys mastered the art of political survival. when wizards and witches voted to go into hiding with the establishment of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692. The Malfoys publicly supported the decision while privately working to maintain their influence in both worlds. They divested themselves of obvious Muggle holdings, yes, but through layers of intermediaries and complex arrangements, they continued to profit from both magical and non-magical enterprises. By the time of the Ministry of Magic's formal establishment, the Malfoys had positioned themselves perfectly. They were too wealthy to be ignored, too influential to be excluded, and too clever to be caught in any outright wrongdoing. They donated generously to ministry causes, funded expansions and improvements, and ensured their name was carved literally, in some cases, into the very foundations of magical government in Britain. To understand Draco, one must first understand Lucius. And to understand Lucius, one must understand Abraxas Malfoy, Lucius's father and Draco's grandfather. Abraxas was a man of the old schooler, believer in absolute pure-blood supremacy, a collector of dark artifacts, and a man who viewed his son not as a child to be nurtured, but as an heir to be molded. Lucius grew up in Malfoy Manor, surrounded by luxury, yes, but also by expectations that would have crushed a lesser personality. He learned from his earliest days that Malfoys do not fail. Malfoys do not show weakness. Malfoys do not befriend those beneath them, love those unworthy of their bloodline, or deviate from the path of pure blood excellence. When Lucius arrived at Hogwarts, he was already perfectly formed a miniature aristocrat, with his father's sneer and his family's arrogance. He was sorted into Slytherin, naturally, where he quickly established himself among the elite. This was during the period when Tom Riddle, who had by then fully embraced the name Lord Voldemort, was gathering his first followers. Lucius was not yet old enough to join the Death Eaters during his school years, but he was certainly cultivated, groomed for eventual recruitment. I was myself a student during some of Lucius's later years at Hogwarts. I observed him with the cold assessment I applied to all my peers. He was intelligent, I grant him that, though not brilliant. He was cunning, but in a conventional way he followed the playbook written by generations of Malfoys before him. Where he excelled was in understanding social dynamics, in knowing whom to cultivate and whom to crush. He was a bully, yes, but an elegant one, preferring psychological torture to crude physical violence. After leaving Hogwarts, Lucius did what was expected of him. He married well. Narcissa Black, younger sister to Bellatrix and Andromeda, was the perfect choice pure-blood nobility, beautiful, accomplished, and from a family nearly as obsessed with blood purity as his own. The fact that Andromeda had been disowned for marrying the Muggle-born Ted Tonks only reinforced Narcissa's value in the eyes of the pure-blood elite. She had remained true to the old ways. But here we glimpse the first crack in the Malfoy facade, the first hint that Lucius was not entirely the man his father had crafted. For Lucius, you see, loved Narcissa, not in the passionate, all-consuming way of storybooks, but in his own way, deeply and genuinely. And when Draco was born, Lucius loved his son as well. This love would prove to be both the most human aspect of Lucius Malfoy, and ultimately, his greatest vulnerability. Lucius joined the Death Eaters, of course. How could he not? The Dark Lord's philosophy aligned perfectly with everything Lucius had been taught to believe. Pure blood supremacy was not merely a preference, but the natural order of things. Muggles and Muggleborns were inferior. The ministry was weak and corrupted by its tolerance of the unworthy. The Dark Lord would restore the wizarding world to its proper state, with families like the Malfoys in their rightful position of dominance. But Lucius was never a true believer, not in the way that Bellatrix was. He supported the Dark Lord because it served Malfoy interests, because it aligned with his worldview, and because to do otherwise would have been to betray everything his family stood for. When the Dark Lord fell on that fateful night in Godric's Hollow, Lucius displayed the true Malfoy skill: survival. He claimed the imperious curse, donated heavily to the right causes, and slithered back into respectable society with barely a blemish on his reputation. This is the world into which Draco Malfoy was born, a world of pretense and performance, of carefully maintained appearances, of loyalty purchased rather than earned. Lucius had escaped justice, yes, but at the cost of living a lie, of constantly looking over his shoulder, of never being entirely certain that his past would not catch up with him. Draco Lucius Malfoy entered the world on the 5th of June, 1980, in the master bedroom of Malfoy Manor, attended by the finest private healers that money could buy. From his first breath, he was the heir to one of Britain's wealthiest and most influential wizarding families. He wanted for nothing material: the finest toys, the best tutors, anything his young heart might desire was his for the asking. But what he had in abundance materially, he lacked in other, more crucial ways. Consider the household in which young Draco was raised. Malfoy Manor was not a home in any warm sense of the word. It was a museum, a shrine to pure blood glory, a monument to the Malfoy legacy. Every object had value, every room had history, every corner whispered of the weight of expectation. The manor was staffed not by house elves who were part of a family, as one might find in older, more traditional pure-blood homes, but by servants who knew their place and kept to it. The family's house elf, Dobby, lived in terror of displeasing his masters, punishing himself for the slightest infractions. This was the environment in which Draco learned what family meant, what loyalty looked like, what power required. His mother, Narcissa, loved him fiercely, but her love was constrained by the conventions of her class and upbringing. She was not the type to get down on the floor and play childish games. She did not laugh freely or encourage wild imagination. Instead, she taught him manners, decorum, the importance of appearance and reputation. She taught him whom he could associate with and whom he must avoid. She taught him that to be a Malfoy meant to be better than others, and that this superiority must be maintained at all costs. His father, Lucius, provided a different sort of education. Lucius taught Draco about power, how to recognize it, how to acquire it, how to wield it. He taught him that the world was divided into those who mattered and those who did not, and that a Malfoy must always be among the former. He taught him that fear was a useful tool, that manipulation was a necessary skill, and that showing weakness was unforgivable. But Lucius also taught Draco perhaps without meaning to, about the precariousness of power. Young Draco observed his father's careful political maneuvering, his donations to ministry officials, his cultivated friendships with those in positions of authority. He saw how his father's face would tighten when certain subjects were mentioned, how he would become very still when the past threatened to intrude upon the present. Draco learned that even the mighty must sometimes bow, must sometimes pretend, must sometimes hide who they truly are. The boy had no real friends, not in any genuine sense. The children he associated with Theodore, not Vincent Crabbe. Gregory Goyle were selected based on their families' positions and pure-blood status, not on any basis of companionship or shared interests. Crabbe and Goyle in particular were less friends than followers, their fathers having served Lucius as Lucius had served the Dark Lord. The pattern repeated itself in the next generation, as these patterns so often do. Draco was tutored at home, as was customary for children of his status. He learned the basics of magic, of course, but also history, the Malfoy version of it, naturally, in which his family was always on the right side, always acted with honor, always represented the best of wizarding culture. He learned about blood purity as though it were established fact rather than ideology. He learned to see Muggles as lesser beings, Muggleborns as thieves of magic, and anyone who disagreed with these views as either fools or traitors to their own kind. By the time his Hogwarts letter arrived, Draco had been perfectly programmed. He knew what was expected of him. He would be sorted into Slytherin. He would excel in his studies. He would associate with the right sort of people, and he would bring honor to the Malfoy name. Failure was not an option that had ever been presented to him. But there was something else, something that festered beneath the polished surface. Draco had learned that love was conditional on his performance, his success, his adherence to family expectations. He had learned that his value came not from who he was, but from what he represented. He had learned that to be vulnerable was to be weak, and to be weak was to be worthless. Is it any wonder, then, what he became? When Draco boarded the Hogwarts Express on the 1st of September, 1991, he was already in character. The role he would play for the next 6 years had been written for him long before. His father had given him explicit instructions. Cultivate the right friendships, maintain the family reputation, and above all, remember that he was a Malfoy. His first encounter with Harry Potter set the stage for everything that would follow. In that robe shop in Diagon Alley, and later on the train, Draco extended what he genuinely believed to be a generous offer of friendship. From his perspective, Harry Potter, the famous boy who lived, survivor of the Dark Lord's curse, clearly from a wizarding family of significance, was exactly the sort of person a Malfoy should know. That Harry rejected this overture, and worse, chose the friendship of a Weasley over his, was a humiliation Draco could neither forgive nor forget. You see, Draco had no framework for understanding Harry's choice. In Draco's world, people like the Weasleys were to be pitied at best, scorned at worst. They were blood traitors, purebloods, who had betrayed their heritage by sympathizing with Muggles and Muggleborns. They were poor, which in Malfoy philosophy was nearly as bad as being Muggleborn. That Harry Potter would choose Ronald Weasley over Draco Malfoy made no sense, unless Harry himself was somehow deficient in judgment or character. And so began a rivalry that was, from the start, entirely one-sided. Harry Potter, I observed, did not particularly care about Draco Malfoy. He found the boy annoying, certainly, and objected to his treatment of others. But Harry did not obsess over Draco the way Draco obsessed over Harry. This imbalance itself speaks volumes about what drove Draco's behavior. Throughout his first year, Draco played his part perfectly. He sneered at Muggleborns, particularly Hermione Granger, whom he targeted with a viciousness that revealed his deep-seated fear that intelligence and ability might not, in fact, correlate with blood purity as he had been taught. He surrounded himself with Crabbe and Goyle, using them as muscle and audience. He cultivated a relationship with me, his head of house, though I gave him little encouragement and no special favors despite his father's expectations. He cheated, he lied, he bullied, but always within acceptable bounds, always in ways that allowed for plausible deniability. This, too, was the Malfoy way. Never be caught doing anything that could seriously damage the family reputation, but maintain dominance through whatever means necessary. The episode with Norbert, the dragon, demonstrated both Draco's cunning and his limitations. He successfully got Harry and Hermione caught out of bed, yes, but he was caught himself in the process and ended up serving detention alongside them. This pattern would repeat throughout his school years. Draco was clever enough to create problems for his enemies, but not quite clever enough to avoid the consequences himself. The detention in the Forbidden Forest revealed something else: genuine fear. When confronted with real danger, with the hooded figure drinking unicorn blood, Draco's carefully constructed confidence evaporated. He panicked, he ran, and in doing so, he revealed the frightened child beneath the aristocratic sneer. But this vulnerability was never acknowledged, never processed. Instead, it was buried, pushed down beneath renewed arrogance and bravado. His second year brought new opportunities for Draco to demonstrate his superiority, or so he thought. When the Chamber of Secrets was opened, Draco was genuinely delighted. Here, finally, was validation of everything he had been taught. The heir of Slytherin was purging the school of mudbloods, as they deserved. The fear in the eyes of Muggle-born students was, to Draco, nothing more than appropriate recognition of their inferior status. He did not know, of course, that the heir of Slytherin was being manipulated by a memory preserved in a diary, nor that his own father had been the one to plant that diary in Ginny Weasley's cauldron. Lucius had not told Draco of his plans, had not trusted his son with the truth. Even within his own family, Draco was kept in the dark, considered too young or too unreliable to be entrusted with important information. When the diary was destroyed and the attacks stopped, Draco lost his enthusiasm for the subject rather quickly. This, too, was characteristic. His beliefs were strong when convenient, when supported by apparent evidence, but they had no deep foundation because they were not truly his own. They were borrowed convictions, inherited prejudices, performed ideology. Third year brought the glory of watching Potter face the Dementors, and Draco seized every opportunity to mock Harry for his fear of these creatures. That Draco himself was terrified of Dementors, that he too would have failed in the face of them, never seemed to occur to him. Or perhaps it did. Which is why he mocked so viciously. Projecting his own fears onto others is a common enough defense mechanism. The Hippogriff incident was quintessential Draco Malfoy. He approached Buckbeak with the arrogance of someone who had never experienced real consequences. Ignored explicit instructions because he believed rules were for lesser people, and then milked the resulting injury far beyond its actual severity. That his father tried to have an innocent creature executed over this minor injury demonstrates the toxic entitlement that ran through the family like rot through wood. By 4th year, Draco had refined his performance to an art form. The Potter stinks badges, the constant mockery, the cruel commentary on Hermione's appearance at the Yule Ball, these were the actions of someone desperately trying to matter, to be relevant, to have an impact on those who largely ignored him. When he attempted to curse Harry from behind after the 3rd task, only to be transformed into a ferret by Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Madai Moody. The humiliation was complete, and I saw it in his eyes afterward, not just anger at being humiliated, but confusion that the usual Malfoy protections had not prevented this consequence. 5th year marked the beginning of Draco's true descent. His father had returned to the Dark Lord's side, had been present at the rebirthing ritual in the graveyard. The Dark Lord had returned, and the Malfoys were once again in the inner circle. Draco swelled with renewed importance, believing that his family's rising fortunes validated everything he had been taught. He joined Dolores Umbridge's inquisitorial squad with enthusiasm, relishing the power to police other students, to punish those he deemed inferior or problematic. This was what he understood: power through position, authority through appointment, respect through fear. He helped Umbridge hunt down Dumbledore's army, leading the group that captured Harry and his friends in the Room of Requirement. But then came the Department of Mysteries, and everything changed. Draco was not there, of course. He was still a student, still too young to fight alongside the Death Eaters in their attempt to retrieve the prophecy. But his father was there. His father fought and failed. His father was captured, unmasked, revealed to all as a Death Eater. The lie that had protected the Malfoys for 14 years was shattered in a single night. Lucius Malfoy was sent to Azkaban, convicted and imprisoned. The family's reputation was destroyed. Their political influence evaporated. The Ministry seized many of their dark artifacts, and young Draco, just 15 years old, became the man of Malfoy Manor in his father's absence. Is it any wonder what happened next? The summer before Draco's 6th year at Hogwarts was unlike any he had previously experienced. Malfoy Manor, always somewhat cold despite its grandeur, became a place of genuine dread. The Dark Lord himself took up residence there, using it as headquarters for his operations. The drawing room where Draco had learned his lessons as a child became a place of torture and murder. The peacocks that roamed the grounds were joined by Death Eaters who apparated in and out at all hours. And Draco, the boy who had spent his entire life believing in pure blood supremacy and the righteousness of the Dark Lord's cause, finally saw what these beliefs looked like in practice. He watched Charity Burbage, the Muggle Studies professor from Hogwarts, suspended above the dining table, pleading for mercy before being killed and fed to Nagini. He heard the screams from the cellar. He saw his mother's face, careful, neutral, terrified. He learned what it meant to live under the Dark Lord's rule, and it was nothing like the glorious restoration of wizarding supremacy he had been promised. But the worst was yet to come. Dark Lord summoned Draco and gave him a task: kill Albus Dumbledore. On the surface, this was an crucial mission given to a 16-year-old, recognition of the boy's abilities and potential. But both Draco and his mother understood the truth. This was a punishment for Lucius's failure at the Department of Mysteries. This was a task designed to be impossible, given to a child as a way of destroying the family completely. When Draco failed, as he surely must, the Dark Lord would kill him, and if by some miracle he succeeded, the boy's soul would be destroyed anyway. Narcissa understood this with perfect clarity, which is why she did something unprecedented for a Death Eater's wife. She sought help from outside the inner circle. She went to me, extracting the unbreakable vow that I would protect her son, guide him in his task, and complete it myself, if necessary. A mother's love drove her to betray the Dark Lord's intentions, if not his explicit orders. She would not let her son die, no matter the cost. Draco returned to Hogwarts for his 6th year, carrying a burden no child should bear. He was no longer playing at being a Death Eater, no longer fantasizing about power and glory. He had been marked, literally branded with the dark mark on his left forearm, given a task that would end either in his death or his damnation. I watched him struggle that year with something approaching pity, though I could do little to help him directly without revealing my own role. He stopped eating properly. He stopped sleeping. The arrogance that had defined him for 5 years crumbled, revealing the terrified child beneath. He spent hours in the room of requirement, working on a plan he knew was likely to fail, growing more desperate and more isolated with each passing week. His attempts to kill Dumbledore were half-hearted at best, and filled with collateral damage at worst. The cursed necklace that nearly killed Katie Bell, the poisoned mead that nearly killed Ron Weasley. These were not the actions of someone truly committed to murder, but of someone going through the motions, unable to either complete the task or refuse it. In the bathroom, when Harry Potter confronted him, Draco's mask finally shattered completely. He broke down, sobbing like the child he still was, and I had to intervene before Potter's righteous fury killed him. The Sectum Sempra curse left Draco bleeding on the bathroom floor, and in that moment I saw the complete failure of everyone who had shaped this boy. His father's ideology had put him in this position. His mother's love, fierce as it was, could not protect him. The Dark Lord was using him as a disposable pawn, and I, bound by my vow, could only patch up the physical wounds, while the psychological ones festered and deepened. The final confrontation on the Astronomy Tower was inevitable. Draco had succeeded in his primary task, getting Death Eaters into Hogwarts through the vanishing cabinet he had spent all year repairing. He had cornered Dumbledore, disarmed the greatest wizard of the age, and had him at one point, and he could not do it. I was there, watching from the shadows. I saw Dumbledore's certainty that Draco would not kill him. I saw Draco's wand arm shaking, saw the tears on his face, saw the desperation of a boy who knew that failing to complete this task meant death for himself, and likely his mother as well. I saw him frozen, unable to move forward into murder, unable to step back from the precipice. So I did what I had vowed to do. I killed Albus Dumbledore myself, adding another layer of tragedy to this already catastrophic situation. I saved Draco from becoming a murderer, but at the cost of becoming one myself. I completed the task the Dark Lord had set, but in doing so, I ensured my own eventual death. Draco's relief was palpable, but it was the relief of a condemned man given a temporary reprieve, not a true escape. He had failed his task, and yet the task was completed. He had not committed murder, and yet was complicit in it. He fled Hogwarts alongside the Death Eaters he had helped infiltrate, returning to Malfoy Manor to face whatever judgment awaited. If Draco's 6th year was difficult, his 7th year was absolutely hellish. Malfoy Manor had become the Dark Lord's headquarters in full, and the Malfoy family's status within the Death Eater ranks had never been lower. Lucius, broken by his time in Azkaban, was a shadow of his former self. Narcissa lived in constant fear for her son, and Draco was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. He did not return to Hogwarts. The Dark Lord kept him close, using him for various tasks, but never trusting him with anything important. Draco was forced to participate in torture sessions, to witness murders, to stand by while innocent people were killed in his family's drawing room. The ideology he had been raised with was shown to be nothing but a thin veneer covering raw cruelty and hunger for power. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione were captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, Draco faced a moment of terrible choice. He was asked to identify Harry, to confirm that the captured boy was indeed the one they sought. And in that moment, Draco Malfoy had spent 6 years tormenting Harry Potter, who had obsessed over him, competed with him, tried to prove himself better than him looked at Harry's cursed, swollen face, and hesitated. "I can't be sure," he said. It was not heroism, it was not redemption. It was simply the action of someone who had seen too much death, who could not bring himself to be responsible for more, even when the victim was his supposed enemy. It was the bare minimum of human decency, exercised at terrible risk to himself and his family. The hesitation was noted. The Dark Lord's trust in the Malfoys, already minimal, decreased further. They were kept alive only because they were still useful, but they lived every day knowing that usefulness could evaporate in an instant. When the Battle of Hogwarts came, the Malfoys were there, but their hearts were no longer in it. Narcissa's desperate question to Harry in the Forbidden Forest, "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" revealed where her true loyalty lay. When Harry told her yes, she lied to the Dark Lord himself, declaring Harry dead when he was not. A mother's love proved stronger than ideology, stronger than fear, stronger than the Dark Lord's power. Panned Draco. During the battle, he was simply trying to survive. When Harry saved him from the funfire in the Room of Requirements, saved him despite everything, it was a lesson. Draco had never learned at home that some people help others not because of blood, status, or political alliance, but simply because it is right. In the end, the Malfoys did not fight for the Dark Lord. They did not fight for Dumbledore's forces either. They simply huddled together in the great hall as the battle raged. A family united only in their desperate desire to survive and to keep each other alive. When it was over, when the Dark Lord was defeated, they were not celebrating with the victors, but they were not mourning with the Death Eaters either. They existed in a strange liminal space, neither heroes nor villains in the final reckoning, just survivors of an ideology that had consumed and nearly destroyed them. The trials that followed the Battle of Hogwarts were a grim parade of justice long delayed. Death Eaters were rounded up, tried, and sentenced. The Malfoys, by all rights, should have joined Lucius's former comrades in Azkaban. Lucius had been a Death Eater since his youth. Narcissa had harbored Death Eaters in her home, had been complicit in countless crimes, and Draco bore the dark mark, had let Death Eaters into Hogwarts, had been party to the plan that resulted in Dumbledore's death. But Harry Potter testified on their behalf. The boy who lived, the chosen one, the wizard who had defeated Voldemort, stood before the Wisingamot and spoke of Narcissa's lie in the forest, of how she had helped him when it mattered most. He spoke of Draco's hesitation in identifying him at Malfoy Manor, of how that moment of mercy had bought precious time. He did not claim the Malfoys were good people, but he argued they deserved a chance at life, at redemption, at something other than Azkaban. The Wisingamot, in a decision that angered many, agreed to leniency. Lucius received a prison sentence, but a far shorter one than his crimes warranted. Narcissa, who had no direct involvement in murder or torture, was placed under house arrest with heavy fines and restrictions. And Draco, because of his age during most of his crimes and the coercion he had faced, was given probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. They kept their fortune, though diminished by fines and seized artifacts. They kept their manor, though it was inspected thoroughly and stripped of anything dark or dangerous. They kept their freedom, though it was conditional and constrained, but they could not keep their reputation, their social standing, or their sense of who they were. Imagine being Draco Malfoy in the years following the war. Everything you were raised to believe has been proven catastrophically wrong. The Dark Lord you were taught to revere tried to use you as a disposable tool. The pureblood supremacy you were told was natural law led only to death and destruction. The family pride you were raised to maintain is now a source of shame. And the person who saved your life, who testified on your behalf, who gave you a chance at a future, is the same person you spent 6 years tormenting. How do you live with that? How do you build an identity when the one you were given has been destroyed? How do you look at yourself in the mirror when you know what you almost became, what you could have been, what you were complicit in, even if you never completed the worst acts yourself? The post-war Draco Malfoy was a person struggling with questions he had never been equipped to answer. His parents had taught him how to be superior, but not how to be good. They had taught him how to maintain appearances, but not how to develop genuine character. They had taught him who to despise, but not how to build meaningful relationships with people different from himself. Reports from this period describe a young man who was withdrawn, quiet, and clearly traumatized. He completed his community service without complaint. He attended his counseling sessions. He avoided public attention as much as possible. The arrogant boy who had strutted through Hogwarts was gone. replaced by someone trying to figure out how to simply exist in a world that had moved on from the ideologies that had shaped him. He eventually married Astoria Greengrass, a woman from a respectable pureblood family, but one who had rejected the extremist views that had consumed so many of their class. She was younger than Draco, had not fought in the war, and brought a different perspective to the relationship. By all accounts, she helped him continue the difficult work of unlearning the poison he had been fed since childhood. When their son Scorpius was born, Draco faced another moment of choice. Would he raise his son the way he had been raised, continuing the cycle, or would he break it, giving his child something he himself had never had the freedom to choose his own path, to form his own beliefs, to become his own person? He chose the latter. Draco Malfoy, who had been failed by every adult in his life, determined not to fail his own son in the same way. It was not redemption, exactly, but it was growth. It was the bare beginning of becoming something other than what he had been made to be. Now we arrive at the heart of the matter, the truth that should have been obvious from the beginning. Draco Malfoy was failed. Not failed in the sense of lacking talent or ability, but failed by every system and every person that should have protected, guided, and nurtured him. His family failed him. Lucius and Narcissa loved their son, yes, but they loved an idea of what he should be more than who he actually was. They raised him to be a miniature aristocrat, a pure-blood supremacist, a Malfoy in the traditional mold. They never asked if this was what he wanted, never considered that perhaps these beliefs were toxic, never questioned whether the path they were setting him on might lead to his destruction. When the consequences of their ideology came home, when the Dark Lord used their son as a pawn, they could only watch in horror at the monster they had helped create. Lucius, in particular, failed catastrophically. He indoctrinated his son into beliefs that nearly got him killed. He modeled a version of masculinity based on domination, cruelty, and prejudice. He involved himself with the Dark Lord not once but twice, each time bringing danger closer to his family. And when it mattered most, when Draco needed guidance on the most important task he had ever been given, Lucius was in Azkaban, unavailable, having been caught in his own schemes. Narcissa tried to protect Draco, but her protection was ultimately insufficient. She made the unbreakable vow with me, yes, but that was damage control, not prevention. She had raised Draco in an environment that made the Dark Lord's recruitment of him inevitable. She had reinforced the same prejudices that Lucius taught. Her love was fierce, but it existed within a framework of toxic beliefs and dangerous loyalties. The Wizarding Society failed him. The pureblood culture that produced families like the Malfoys was sick long before Draco was born. It valued blood status over character, wealth over worth, tradition over truth. It created an environment where people like Lucius could indoctrinate their children into hatred and supremacy without intervention. The Ministry of Magic, corrupt and compromised, allowed families like the Malfoys to buy influence and escape consequences for decades, creating a sense of invulnerability that Draco inherited. Hogwarts failed him. Yes, Dumbledore was dealing with larger threats. And yes, I was constrained by my role as a spy. But the fact remains that Draco Malfoy attended Hogwarts for 6 years, displaying obvious signs of deep-seated prejudice, bullying behavior, and eventually serious psychological distress, and no teacher intervened in any meaningful way. We gave him detentions for rule breaking, but did nothing to address the underlying issues. When he returned for his 6th year, clearly struggling, clearly afraid, clearly in over his head, we watched but did not help in ways that might have made a difference. I myself failed him, though my failure was more complex than most. I was his head of house, someone he looked up to, someone who could perhaps have guided him differently. But I was also a spy, playing a role, maintaining cover. I could not openly challenge his beliefs without compromising my position. I could not offer him an alternative worldview without risking exposure. When Narcissa made me take the unbreakable vow, I accepted to save Draco's life, but in doing so, I became complicit in a plan that involved using a child as a weapon. The Dark Lord failed him, though expecting anything else from Voldemort would be foolish. The Dark Lord did not care about Draco except as a tool to punish Lucius and accomplish a goal. He gave an impossible task to a child, knowing it would likely destroy him, because Draco's suffering served his purposes. This is what ideology divorced from empathy looks like: a willingness to sacrifice anyone, even children, for power and revenge. Harry Potter did not fail him, precisely, but consider the missed opportunities. Here were 2 boys, both raised in difficult circumstances, both marked by prophecy and expectation in different ways, both carrying burdens they did not ask for. They could have been allies, perhaps even friends, if circumstances had been different. But the prejudices Draco was raised with made him choose enmity, and Harry had neither the obligation nor the inclination to save Draco from himself until it was almost too late. The tragic truth is that Draco Malfoy never had a chance. From the moment he was born into Malfoy Manor, his path was set. He would be raised to believe in pure blood supremacy. He would be taught to value the wrong things. He would be given everything material and nothing substantial. He would be prepared for a world that no longer existed and given values that would lead only to destruction. And when the consequences came, when the beliefs he had been taught led him to the edge of becoming a murderer, everyone would act surprised, as if this outcome had not been inevitable from the start. His arrogance, his cruelty, his bullying, these were not innate characteristics, but learned behaviors. He was not born sneering at Muggleborns. He was taught to. He was not naturally inclined to follow the Dark Lord. He was groomed for it. The entitled arrogance that defined him was a mask, a performance, a role he had been rehearsing since he could walk. And beneath it all was simply a boy who wanted his father's approval, his mother's pride, and the certainty that he mattered, that he had value, that he belonged somewhere. The tragedy is that the only way he knew to achieve these things was through the very behaviors and beliefs that would ultimately destroy him. What, then, are we to make of Draco Malfoy? Is he a villain? A victim? Can someone be both? The easy answer is to condemn him for his choices. He bullied, he used slurs, he joined the Death Eaters, he let killers into Hogwarts. These are facts, not interpretations. He caused real harm to real people. and the pain he inflicted cannot be dismissed simply because he was young or because he was raised to behave that way. But the complete answer requires acknowledging the context without using it as an excuse. Draco was responsible for his actions, yes, but he was also a product of systematic indoctrination, generational trauma, and toxic ideology. He made choices, but those choices were made by someone who had been carefully taught to see those choices as correct, natural, and necessary. The true failure was not any single person or system, but the way they all worked together to create a boy who almost became a murderer. Lucius taught him prejudice. Narcissa reinforced it. Wizarding society normalized it. Hogwarts failed to challenge it, and the Dark Lord weaponized it. Each link in the chain contributed to the final result. But here is where the story becomes less tragic and more instructive. Draco did not become what he was being made into. He hesitated at the crucial moment. He could not kill Dumbledore. He could not positively identify Harry at Malfoy Manor. These small acts of mercy, of basic human decency, of resistance to the worst impulses he had been taught, suggest that somewhere beneath all the indoctrination was a person who could choose differently. This does not make him a hero. He did the bare minimum of human decency in moments of extreme pressure. But it does make him human, capable of growth, worthy of the chance he was given after the war. The post-war Draco Malfoy represents something important, the possibility of change. He could not undo the past, could not erase the harm he had caused, could not bring back those who died in the war his beliefs helped fuel. But he could choose to be something different going forward. He could reject the ideology he was raised with. He could raise his son with different values. He could, in small and private ways, try to be better than he had been. Is this redemption? Perhaps not in any grand sense. Draco Malfoy will never be remembered as a hero. His name will always carry the taint of what he almost became, what he was complicit in, what he believed for so many years. But it is the possibility of a future that is not entirely determined by the past. The hope that people can grow beyond their conditioning. The evidence that even those who seem irredeemable might surprise us. The lesson in Draco's story is not that we should excuse those who harm others because they were raised to do so. It is not that being young or influenced absolves one of responsibility. Rather, it is that we must look at systems that produce people like Draco Malfoy and work to dismantle them. We must recognize that hatred is taught, that prejudice is learned, that cruelty is modeled and reinforced. If we want fewer Draco Malfoys in the world, we must address the factors that create them. Families that indoctrinate rather than educate. Societies that value the wrong things. Institutions that fail to intervene. And ideologies that reduce complex human beings to categories of worthy and unworthy. We must also leave room for change, not naive forgiveness that ignores real harm, but realistic acknowledgement that people, especially young people, can grow beyond their worst moments if given the chance and the support. Draco's post-war life was not easy, but it was possible because people like Harry Potter believed in the possibility of change. There is a final element to this tragedy that deserves examination. the weight of family legacy, and the burden of names. Draco Lucius Malfoy. Even his name was chosen to carry on tradition, to honor his father and grandfather, to tie him irrevocably to the family history. He was not named for who he might become, but for who he was expected to be, a continuation of the Malfoy line, another link in the chain. Throughout his life, Draco struggled with this weight. When he succeeded, it was attributed to his family's superiority. When he failed, it was a stain on the family honor. He was never simply Draco. He was always a Malfoy, with all the expectations and assumptions that name carried. Consider what this does to a person. Your value is not determined by your character, but by your ancestry. Your worth is not based on your choices, but on your bloodline. Your future is not yours to decide, but is predetermined by generations of tradition and expectation. How can anyone develop an authentic sense of self under such conditions? The pure blood obsession with family lines and heritage creates a prison for those born into it. They are told they are superior, yes, but this supposed superiority comes with crushing obligations. They must marry appropriately, associate only with the right sort, believe the correct things, maintain the family reputation, and pass on the same toxic values to the next generation. Any deviation is betrayal of the family, of the bloodline, of everything their ancestors supposedly stood for. Draco was trapped in this prison from birth. His grandfather, Abraxas, had certain expectations. His father, Lucius, reinforced them. The entire pure-blood society watched to ensure he conformed. And within this prison, there was no room for him to question whether the beliefs he was taught were true, whether the values he was raised with were good, whether the path laid out for him was one he actually wanted to walk. When Draco named his own son Scorpius, he chose a name that was still traditional, connected to the constellation naming convention the Black family favored, still maintaining some connection to pure-blood customs. But Scorpius Malfoy was not named after his father or grandfather. He was not saddled with the explicit burden of carrying on a legacy in his very name. It was a small act of rebellion, perhaps, or simply a small mercy giving his son a slightly lighter burden to carry. And in how Draco raised Scorpius, we see the clearest evidence of growth. By various accounts, Draco did not indoctrinate his son into pure-blood supremacy. He did not teach him to despise Muggleborns, or to see blood status as the measure of worth. He did not recreate the toxic environment of his own childhood. Instead, he gave Scorpius something he himself had never had: permission to be his own person, to choose his own friends, to form his own beliefs. This was Draco's true redemption, not any grand gesture or public act of heroism, but the private choice to break the cycle, to ensure his son would not be failed in the same ways he had been failed. It was the recognition that the Malfoy legacy, as it had existed for generations, was not worth preserving. That family honor built on prejudice and cruelty was no honor at all. And so we return to where we began. They failed Draco Malfoy. His family failed him by raising him to believe in a toxic ideology that nearly destroyed him. His society failed him by creating and maintaining structures that normalized prejudice and hatred. His school failed him by not intervening when intervention was desperately needed. His government failed him by being so corrupt that families like his could buy their way out of consequences until it was almost too late. The Dark Lord failed him by using him as a disposable tool. And perhaps we all failed him by creating a world where a child could be so thoroughly indoctrinated into hatred before he was old enough to question it. The sad truth behind Draco Malfoy's entitled Arrogance is that it was not really his. It was borrowed, inherited, performed. Beneath it was a boy desperate for approval, terrified of failure, crushed by expectations, and ultimately broken by an ideology he never chose but was forced to serve. But here is the less sad truth. He survived. He grew. He changed, at least to some degree. He broke the cycle with his own son. He showed that while people may be products of their environment, they are not eternally bound by it. Change is possible, growth is achievable, and even those shaped by the worst influences can choose, eventually, to be something different. Draco Malfoy will never be a hero. His past cannot be erased, and the harm he caused was real. But his story serves as a warning about what we create when we fail children, when we indoctrinate rather than educate, when we value ideology over humanity. And it serves as a small hope that even those who seem lost can find their way to something better, if they are given the chance and if they choose to take it. The entitled Arrogance was a mask. Behind it was simply a failed child, trying desperately to become something other than what he was made to be. And in the end, perhaps, he succeeded just enough. Sleep well, knowing that even in the darkest stories, there exists the possibility, however small, however hard one, of choosing a different path.